Grace Martinez stood in the opulent boardroom, her hands steady as she signed the final document. Around her, 12 of the most powerful crime families in New York watched in stunned silence. The woman they dismissed as just the cleaning girl had just bought out their entire operation, a multi-billion-dollar empire built over generations. "Gentlemen," she said, setting down the pen and meeting their eyes one by one, "I believe our business here is concluded." Don Carmine stared at her with something between horror and grudging respect. "Your father would be spinning in his grave, Santangelo." Raphael Santangelo placed his hands on Grace's shoulders. "My father built his empire on outdated principles. Grace is building something that will last beyond all of us. The future isn't coming, gentlemen. She's already here." But 6 months ago, Grace was scrubbing floors and hiding from a world that had forgotten she existed. 6 months ago, she was nobody. This is the story of how a woman society forgot became the queen of an empire built on secrets, power, and a love so dangerous it could destroy them both. The wound that shaped her Grace had always been invisible. Growing up in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in Queens with a single mother who worked 3 jobs, Grace learned early that survival meant staying small, staying quiet, staying unseen. Her mother, Maria, was a force of nature trapped in an exhausted body, a woman who cleaned houses during the day, waitressed at night, and took overnight shifts at a laundromat on weekends. Grace rarely saw her awake. "Mija," Maria would say during those rare moments together, stroking Grace's hair with hands raw from cleaning chemicals. "You're going to be different. You're going to be visible in all the ways I never was." Grace wanted to believe it. But watching her mother work herself to death for people who never remembered her name made her wonder if invisibility was just the price women like them paid for survival. She was smart, smarter than her underfunded school knew what to do with. Teachers offered hollow encouragement. You could really go somewhere, as if wanting it was enough. Then life struck its cruelest blow. When Grace was 19, working 2 jobs and taking night classes, her mother collapsed at work. The diagnosis came swift and brutal: stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. Treatment cost more than Grace could earn in 5 years. Grace took every job she could find. Waitressing where men's hands lingered too long. Cleaning office buildings in the dead of night. Babysitting for families who treated her like furniture. She became a ghost, working herself to the bone while her mother slipped away despite everything. The medical bills piled up like accusations. Each envelope, white, yellow, pink, marked the path to financial destruction. Rent was 3 months overdue. The hospital threatened to stop treatment. She had $47 in her bank account. One night, surrounded by bills she couldn't pay, Grace broke. She cried ugly, desperate sobs for her dying mother, for her own drowning life, for dreams that seemed laughably naive. "I'm such a burden," her mother whispered one night in the hospital, tubes running from her arms like vines. "You should be living your life, not watching me die." "Don't you dare apologize," Grace said fiercely, gripping her mother's frail hand. "I'll find a way. I always do." But the truth was a stone in her throat. She was drowning, and she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe. Entering his world, the job posting appeared on a Wednesday. Housekeeper needed for private estate. $5,000 per week. Discretion required. $5,000 per week. Enough to save her mother. Enough to hope. The address led to the Santangelo estate. Even Grace knew that name. Old money, new power, a family whose legitimate businesses barely conceal the empire built on blood underneath. Raphael Santangelo had inherited control at 16 when his father was murdered. The newspapers called him ruthless. The streets called him untouchable. Women called him devastatingly handsome and dangerously unavailable. Grace told herself she'd never even see him. Rich men like that didn't notice women like her. She'd clean, take his money, save her mother, and disappear back into invisibility. The mansion loomed like something from a Gothic novel. Dark stone, sharp angles, iron gates that groaned like a warning. Marco Benedetti met her at the door, 6.5 feet of muscle and suspicion. "You understand what discretion means?" he asked coldly. "I see nothing. I hear nothing. I say nothing," Grace replied. "Boss is in his office. Don't knock." He hates being interrupted. But Grace had never been good at following rules designed to keep her invisible. She knocked. "Enter." That voice, deep and dark and rich, like whiskey and sin and danger. Grace stepped into Raphael Santangelo's domain. The office was huge, but the man himself stole her breath. The newspapers called him a monster, but he was beautiful in the way dangerous things are beautiful. A knife catching light, a storm rolling in, a wolf watching from shadows. Dark hair, olive skin that glowed, a jaw sharp enough to cut, lips that promised pleasure and pain. Eyes so deep and dark she could drown in them. Something ancient lived in those eyes, violence witnessed and committed, the weight of impossible burdens. When those dark eyes lifted to meet hers, Grace felt the earth shift. He said something in Italian, clearly dismissing her. "I don't speak Italian," Grace said clearly. "If you want me to leave, you'll have to tell me in English." Surprise flickered across his features. He ended his phone call, his eyes never leaving her face. "You knocked on my door." "I did. Marco told you not to. He said you hated being interrupted. He didn't say I couldn't knock. There's a difference." Silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Then his lips curved in what might have been a smile, if smiles could be weapons. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Miss Martinez." "Neither. I'm desperate." "There's a difference." "And what are you desperate for?" Grace took a breath. This was the moment that would define everything. She chose truth. "Money. Enough to save my mother's life. Enough to stop drowning. I'm desperate for enough money to make a difference, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn it." Raphael studied her, reading the exhaustion in her bones, the determination behind her fear, the steel underneath her vulnerability. "Your mother is sick," he said. "Not a question. Cancer. Stage 4. Pancreatic. The treatments are beyond what I can't afford." "And you're working how many jobs?" 3. "For if you count this one. That's why you look like you haven't slept in weeks." Grace flinched but held his gaze. "You start tomorrow. 6 a.m., don't be late." He paused. "And Miss Martinez? Your mother's medical bills will be paid in full by end of business today. Consider it a signing bonus." "I can't accept." "You can and you will. Think of it as an investment in your loyalty. I'm paying for your mother's life. In return, you belong to this family. Your loyalty, your discretion, your service, they're mine now." "Understood." The words should have sounded like a threat. Instead, they sounded like salvation. "Understood," Grace whispered. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Miss Martinez, welcome to the family." Grace had just sold herself into a world of shadows and secrets. But as she walked out, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The dance begins for 3 weeks. Grace was a ghost in Raphael's world. She arrived before sunrise, cleaned with meticulous care, left before sunset. But Raphael had a way of making her feel seen even when he wasn't there. Fresh flowers appeared in her cart. Peonies, her favorite, though she'd never mentioned it. Her paycheck came with unexplained bonuses. Her mother was moved to a private room with round-the-clock care. No explanation, just gifts from a man who wielded generosity like a weapon. "He does this," Marco said one morning, "observes people, learns what they need, then provides it. Why? Control, loyalty, power. Or maybe he just likes you. He's been alone a long time." Grace found evidence of Raphael's dual nature everywhere. Legitimate documents beside files she knew were illegal. Dante next to texts on warfare. $1 million paintings beside a child's crayon drawing. From his younger sister, Isabella, who died in a suspicious car accident when Raphael was 18, the same year his mother took her own life. "He loved her more than anything," Marco said quietly. The brakes failed on a car that had just been serviced. No one could prove sabotage, but Grace began to understand that Raphael was both monster and man, capable of ordering death before breakfast, then spending the afternoon reading poetry. The breaking point came when Grace entered his study at 6 a.m. and found him still there, exhausted, human in a way that made her heart twist. "You should sleep," Grace said. "Can't sleep. Too many ghosts." His voice was rough, broken. "They're louder in the dark." Grace should have left. Instead, she said, "Tell me about them." Raphael stared at her. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he began to talk. About his father, gunned down when Raphael was 16. About inheriting an empire when other boys worried about prom. About learning to be ruthless because mercy was suicide. About his mother, who looked at him and saw only the man who'd taken her husband's place, who withered away until she chose pills over her own son. She left me a note. Just 3 words, "I'm sorry, baby." As if that was enough. Grace's heart ached. "I see a man," she whispered, stepping closer. "Right now. Someone who's tired and lonely and carrying too much weight alone. Someone who deserves to be loved for who he is." Something shifted in Raphael's expression. He stood, moving until he was close enough that she could feel his heat. "Don't," he said roughly, fingers tracing her jaw. "Don't look at me like I'm worth saving, like I'm more than my sins. Because if you keep looking at me like you believe I can be better, I'll start believing it too. And hope is the most dangerous thing you can give a man like me. Maybe you deserve hope. Maybe we both do." Raphael's control shattered. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her face up, and for one breathless moment, she thought he'd kiss her. Instead, he rested his forehead against hers, trembling with restraint. "You have no idea what being mine would mean. It means you'll never be safe. It means loving me will put a target on your back. I'm not afraid of you. You should be. I've killed men for less than looking at me wrong. I've done things that would give you nightmares. I already have nightmares. About my mother dying. About drowning in debt. Your darkness doesn't scare me, Raphael. My own does." He pulled back, searching her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we're both broken. Maybe we're both tired of pretending to be strong. But maybe together, we could hold each other up. Grace, I'm not asking for promises. Just for right now. For this moment where we're both human and hurting and tired of being alone." Raphael stared at her. Then he kissed her, desperate and consuming, like a drowning man finding air. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "This is a mistake," he whispered. "Probably. You're going to break my heart, or you'll break mine. So why are we doing this?" Grace smiled. "Because being broken together is better than being whole alone." Deepening connection, everything changed. Grace still arrived at sunrise, still cleaned. But now Raphael was there, and conversations lasted hours, revealing souls. He showed her his architectural sketches, beautiful buildings he still drew when sleep wouldn't come. "They're gorgeous," Grace breathed. "You're incredibly talented. Talent doesn't matter when you're born into a cage. Then maybe it's time to unlock the door. Maybe it's not too late." He looked at her with wonder. "You really believe people can change? That redemption is possible?" "I have to believe it. Otherwise, what's the point?" Grace shared her stories too. About her mother's strength and stubbornness. About growing up poor but loved. About the scholarship she'd turned down to work and pay bills. "Do you regret it?" Raphael asked one night. "Every day," Grace admitted. "But I'd do it again." "Not anymore. Now you have me. Now your mother gets the best care, and you get to dream again." Their relationship deepened in stolen moments that became less stolen. Morning coffee in comfortable silence. Late-night conversations. His hand finding hers under dinner tables. The way he'd pull her onto his lap while reviewing contracts. Her presence calming something restless in his soul. "You're different with her," Marco observed, watching Raphael actually laugh at something Grace said. "Lighter. She makes me remember who I wanted to be. She makes me believe I could still become that person." The stakes rise. The first threat came in whispers. People had noticed Grace, noticed how Raphael looked at her. Some saw opportunity. Others saw weakness to exploit. "They're calling her your whore," Marco told Raphael bluntly. saying she's disposable. Who? Raphael's voice went dangerously blank. Does it matter? They think you're amusing yourself while you look for a real wife from a real family. Then they're about to learn otherwise. That night, Raphael called a meeting of the 5 families, the power structure that controlled New York. Grace insisted on attending. If it's about me, I should be there. The meeting was held in the restaurant where Raphael's father had been killed, a deliberate choice. 5 men sat around the table, their eyes dismissing Grace as decoration. Raphael's hand was possessive on her lower back. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. I wanted you to meet Grace Martinez officially. Some of you have disrespected her. That ends tonight. She's a cleaning lady, Salvatore Russo said dismissively. Why should we care? Because she's mine, my woman, my future wife, my partner. Disrespecting her is the same as disrespecting me. Threatening her means war. Touching her means war. Any questions? The temperature dropped. Grace felt their stares recalculating her value. You're going to marry her? Don Carmine spoke. Outside the families? Your father would turn in his grave. My father is dead. I'm not. The world is changing. We need to change with it or die. Grace is smart, loyal, and understands sacrifice better than most born into our world. Those are the qualities that matter. She's a liability, someone muttered. No, Marco spoke up. She's an asset. She's clever, observant, got instinct for this life. The boss isn't making a mistake. He's making a strategic alliance. I'm not asking permission, Raphael continued. I'm telling you as a courtesy. Grace Martinez is family now. You treat her accordingly, or you answer to me. Choose wisely. The meeting ended with grudging acceptance. But Grace could feel the hostility simmering. She'd become a target. That was dangerous, she said as they drove home. Everything about this life is dangerous. But now you're protected. Now everyone knows touching you means war. But promises made in darkness are hard to keep in the light. The call came at 2 a.m. Grace fumbled for her phone, already knowing it was bad news. Miss Martinez, you need to come to the hospital now. Your mother has taken a turn. You should come say goodbye. Grace's world tilted. Raphael drove her to the hospital, his hand gripping hers so tightly she'd bruise. Her mother looked so small, surrounded by machines trying desperately to keep her alive. Mija, Maria whispered. You came. Always, Mama. Always. I'm so tired of fighting. I know. Grace's tears fell. I'm sorry I'm leaving you. I'm sorry I won't see you get married, have babies. Don't say that. You're going to fight. Grace. Let me go, baby. I've fought as long as I can. It's okay. It's not okay. You're all I have. How am I supposed to exist without you? No. Maria's gaze shifted to Raphael in the doorway. You have love waiting. You have a future. Promise me you'll let yourself be loved. Promise me you'll stop being invisible. Promise me you'll take up space and demand respect. Mama, promise me. I promise. Good girl. I love you, Mija. You are my greatest accomplishment. Her mother's eyes closed. One last breath. Then nothing. The machine screamed. Nurses rushed in. Maria Martinez was gone. And Grace's world ended. Rock-bottom Grace didn't remember much of what happened next. Raphael holding her as she sobbed. Paperwork that needed signing. A funeral 3 days later, small, intimate, devastating. After standing alone in the cemetery, Grace felt something inside her break completely. She'd failed. Despite everything, her mother had died anyway. I'm sorry, Raphael said, approaching slowly. Grace laughed, a broken sound with no humor. Everyone's sorry, but sorry doesn't bring her back. Sorry doesn't fill the hole. No, it doesn't. I failed her. I worked myself to death, and she died anyway. All that sacrifice, it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. Grace, don't tell me I did everything I could, because if it wasn't my fault, then it's just random cruelty. And I don't know which is worse. Raphael didn't try to touch her or offer empty comfort. He just stood there, solid and present, letting her break apart. Come home with me, he said finally. I don't have a home anymore. Yes, you do. Let me take care of you while you fall apart. Let me be strong while you're weak. Why are you doing this? Because you're mine, and I protect what's mine. I love what's mine. I'm not a possession. No, you're so much more. You're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen past the monster. You're the only person who makes me want to be better. You're the only person I've ever loved. The words hung between them, raw and honest. I know it's too soon. I know you're grieving. But life is short and brutal, and we don't get guarantees. So I'm telling you now, I love you, Grace Martinez. I love your strength and stubbornness and the way you refuse to stay invisible. I love you, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you. Grace walked into his arms and let him hold her while she cried. I love you too, she whispered. God help me, I love you too. Rising from the ashes, Grace moved into the mansion as Raphael's partner, his equal. Slowly, painfully, she began to heal. Grief had stripped away her fear. When you've lost everything, what's left to be afraid of? She started attending meetings, not as decoration, but as a participant. She listened, learned, saw patterns Raphael missed. You're good at this, Marco observed after Grace solved a territorial dispute without bloodshed. Or maybe I see things differently because I wasn't raised in it. Grace studied Raphael's world with intensity. She learned about power structures, unwritten rules, who could be trusted. Teach me, she said to Raphael one night. Teach me everything. How to read people, how to negotiate, how to turn disadvantages into weapons. I want to be strong. I want to stand beside you as an equal. Why? Because my mother spent her whole life being invisible. I promised her I wouldn't do the same. I promised I'd take up space and demand respect. So teach me how. He did. He taught her about negotiation, finding what people wanted and using it, about power dynamics, how authority was performed as much as possessed, about violence, understanding it, recognizing threats, neutralizing them before they escalated. In our world, being a woman is either a death sentence or a superpower, he explained. Men will underestimate you by default. You can let that diminish you or weaponize it. Let them underestimate you, then strike when they're not looking. Grace learned fast. She learned the family's dynamics, old alliances, nursed grudges, debts, and favors. She learned who was loyal, ambitious, dangerous. But more than tactics, she learned about herself, that she was smarter than she'd been given credit for, that she had instincts that surprised even Raphael. Raphael started bringing her to more meetings, asking her opinion, introducing her as his partner. She's got a head for numbers and balls to speak up, Don Carmine observed after Grace identified an accounting discrepancy. You chose well, Santangelo. For the first time, Grace felt powerful, capable, seen. She was transforming from invisible to invincible. Proving her worth the betrayal came from inside. Raphael's cousin Antonio had been selling information to rivals for months. He's making his move tonight, Marco said grimly. 6 gunmen at the warehouse meeting. They're coming for you, boss. Then we'll be ready, Raphael said coldly. We'll fortify, bring extra men, no. Grace stepped forward. There's a better way. She explained her plan, risky, audacious, requiring perfect timing. But if it worked, they'd end the threat without bloodshed, without war. You could get killed, Raphael said. So could you if we do this your way. At least mine gives us both a chance. Antonio won't be fooled easily, which is why this will work. He's so busy looking for threats from men that he won't see me coming. He'll dismiss me like he always does, and that dismissal will be his downfall. Raphael studied her, pride and terror warring in his expression. Then he kissed her with desperate intensity. If anything happens to you, it won't. Trust me. That night, Grace played her part perfectly. She wore a dress that made her look soft and unthreatening. She asked naive questions, looked uncomfortable during talk of violence. She played into every assumption Antonio made about women being decoration. She accidentally stumbled into the private room where Antonio was finalizing his coup, planted recording devices throughout the warehouse, and then, playing scared and grateful, She made Antonio feel smart, powerful, protective, while making him brag about his plans, confess to his betrayal, reveal everything. She got all. Names, dates, payments. Every word recorded. When Raphael and his men walked in, when Antonio realized he'd been trapped by the woman he dismissed, the shock on his face was priceless. "You bitch," he snarled, lunging for Grace. But Grace sidestepped, her hand coming up with a gun pressed against his temple, her hands rock steady. "Don't," she said quietly. "I'd hate to ruin this dress with your blood. It's vintage." The warehouse erupted. Then Marco played the recordings, Antonio's voice filling the space, confessing everything. "Looks like we have a problem," Raphael said. "Antonio has betrayed this family. According to our code, that requires blood payment. Unless," Grace interjected, "we find a more civilized solution." Everyone turned to look at her. "Going to war seems wasteful," Grace continued. "Blood feuds are expensive, draw attention, destabilize everything. Antonio is clearly guilty. But your family," she looked at the Torino representatives, "was manipulated. That's embarrassing, not unforgivable. So here's what happens. Antonio is exiled. He leaves New York tonight, never returns on pain of death. The Torinos pay $5 million as compensation. In return, we avoid war, maintain stability, and everyone goes home alive. Sound reasonable?" The silence was deafening. Then Don Torino nodded slowly. "Reasonable. We agree." Antonio raged about betrayal, but Raphael grabbed him by the throat. "You're lucky she's merciful. I'd have put a bullet in your brain. But Grace is better than I am. So you get to live, as long as you're on a plane in 2 hours and we never see your face again." The coup ended that night. Antonio was driven to JFK and put on a plane. The Torinos transferred $5 million before sunrise. And Grace stood beside Raphael as he addressed the families. "This is Grace Martinez, my partner, my equal, my future wife. She's the reason we're not at war tonight. She's proven she belongs in this world, that she has the intelligence and courage to lead beside me. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. Anyone who underestimates her does so at their own risk. Anyone who threatens her signs their own death warrant." Understood. The room erupted in acknowledgement. Grace realized she'd done it. She'd gone from invisible cleaning lady to equal partner. She'd proven that being underestimated was the greatest weapon a woman could wield, as long as you had the intelligence and courage to use it. She'd become invincible. Claiming her crown 6 months later, Grace stood in that boardroom, signing documents that gave her control of Raphael's legitimate businesses. She transformed his empire, taking dark money and laundering it through ventures so skillfully that even forensic accountants couldn't trace origins. She'd created a network that made their fortune untouchable by law, unassailable by rivals, sustainable for generations. She'd given Raphael what he'd wanted for years, a way out of the darkness. "You've done the impossible," Raphael whispered as they left. "You've given me a way out, a way to go legitimate, to give our children something better. We did it together. No, Bella. This was you." He pulled her into an empty room, his hands framing her face. "You transformed a criminal empire into something respectable, something our children could inherit without shame. You're magnificent." That night, standing on their penthouse terrace, watching the city glitter below, Grace thought about the woman she'd been. Invisible, powerless, drowning. "I wish she could see me now," Grace said softly. "She can," Raphael replied. "She's watching, and she's proud of the woman you've become. I couldn't have done it without you. You saw me when I was invisible. You were never invisible to me. From the moment you knocked on my door, refusing to be dismissed, you were the most real thing in my world." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a ring that caught the city lights. "Grace Martinez, you walked into my life when I'd given up on happiness. You saw through my darkness and loved me anyway. You transformed yourself from invisible to invincible with more courage than anyone I've ever known. Will you marry me? Will you build an empire with me?" Will you spend the rest of your life reminding me that redemption is possible? Yes, Grace whispered, then louder, yes. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring on, then pulled her into a kiss filled with love and promise and hope. Two broken people, made whole by loving each other's broken pieces. Epilogue: the wedding blended their worlds, Grace's elegance and Raphael's grandeur. But Grace's favorite part was the private ceremony that morning in the mansion's chapel. Just two people promising to love each other through whatever came next. They built a life together. Not perfect, their world was too complicated for perfection. But theirs. Grace continued transforming the business toward legitimate enterprises while Raphael extricated himself from violence. They had twin girls 3 years later, who had their mother's intelligence and their father's presence. "You're raising queens," Marco observed, watching the girls negotiate over toys like seasoned diplomats. "I'm raising women who know their worth," Grace corrected, "who understand that being underestimated is an advantage if you're smart enough to use it, who will never accept being invisible." Years later, Grace stood before young women at a domestic violence shelter, sharing her story. "You are not your circumstances," she told them, looking into exhausted, scared faces. "You're not defined by what's been done to you. You have power inside you that the world hasn't seen yet." "But how?" one woman asked. "How do you go from nothing to everything?" "You start by being seen. Really seen." Grace leaned forward. "You find one person who looks past the surface to the strength underneath. Sometimes that person is someone else. Sometimes it's you seeing yourself clearly for the first time. But once you're seen, you can't go back to being invisible. And that's when everything changes." My mother used to tell me I was destined for something more. I didn't believe her, but she was right. Not because I was special or lucky, because I refused to stay invisible. Because when opportunity came disguised as danger, I walked through anyway. Because when the world tried to dismiss me, I demanded to be heard. She looked at the women before her. "You are all destined for more than this moment. You are enough. You have always been enough. The world just hasn't caught up yet." Leaving the shelter with Raphael waiting, Grace thought about how far they'd both come. "Good day," he asked. "The best. I helped some women see themselves the way you helped me." They drove home in comfortable silence, hands linked. Their empires stretched across the city now, legitimate businesses their children could inherit without shame. Grace Martinez Santangelo was no longer invisible. She was one of the most powerful women in New York. She'd gone from cleaning Raphael's mansion to co-ruling his empire, from drowning to thriving, from victim to victor. But more important was the lesson she'd learned and now taught. True strength isn't about being the loudest or most feared. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to accept less. It's about using being underestimated as a weapon instead of wearing it as shame. It's about transforming circumstances rather than being defined by them. That night, with Raphael's arms around her and their daughters sleeping peacefully inside, Grace whispered to her mother's memory, "I made it, Mama. I'm not invisible anymore. I'm seen. I'm powerful. I'm loved. And I'm teaching your granddaughters the same. Everything you wanted from me, I have it now. And I'll make sure they have it too." The city sparkled below, full of women just waiting to discover their own power. Women who thought they were invisible but were really just waiting for the right moment to step into the light. This is Grace's story, but it's also yours. Every woman who's ever felt invisible. Every woman who's been underestimated. You are more. You have always been more. The world just hasn't caught up yet. You are not invisible. You are not powerless. You are magnificent, powerful, and destined for more than this moment. The world is waiting for you to step into the light. So step. Claim your power. Be seen, because you deserve everything you've ever dreamed of. And it starts now.